A struggling, innocent nurse sang to her comatose ICU patient every night. She didn't know he was a billionaire. Welcome to Beyond Color Stories. I'm your storyteller, James. Hope you're doing wonderfully today. May your heart be filled with peace, your days touched by joy, and love always surround you deeply. Now, according to my loyal family's loving demands, here comes another most romantic story brought to you by my beautiful wife, Selena. I truly hope you love it. It's pure love and romance at its finest. And guess what? Selena really wants to connect with all of you. So how many of my family members want to hear her voice? Let me know in the comments below. But before we dive in, tell me where you're listening from. Let's build this beautiful family together. Don't forget to subscribe to Beyond Color Stories. And now let's begin the most romantic love story you've ever heard. The cold fluorescent lights of the city hospital never flickered, their sterile glow casting a pale sheen on the polished floor tiles, echoing softly beneath hurried footsteps and the occasional squeak of rubber soles. Nightfall brought no stillness to this side of the world. Here, where lives hung between a breath and a prayer, quiet came not as peace but as pause, where even the silence carried weight. Rita moved gracefully down the ICU hallway like a soft shadow, her nurse's scrubs neatly pressed, her ID badge swinging gently with each step. Her long, stylishly straight hair was tied back in a low ponytail that still managed to look effortlessly elegant, the subtle gleam of her brown skin catching the dim corridor lights, glowing like honey under moonlight. A hint of red lipstick painted her lips, not too bold, but just enough to brighten the weariness in her reflection when she glimpsed herself in the glass window she passed. Her eyes, framed by delicate lashes, held something rare. Warmth, even at 3 o'clock in the morning when most hearts in the world slumbered. She had the eyes of someone who had seen pain but refused to grow numb to it, someone who had chosen empathy over armor. Her footsteps were light but sure, familiar with this stretch of hallway, especially the last room on the left, room 214. It had become her quiet retreat, the place where her shift always found a different rhythm. Not in procedures or IV checks, but in the soft, wordless connection she felt to the patient within. She reached the door and paused, her hand on the handle, her breath drawn in like a whisper. The room was dim, lit only by the gentle glow of monitoring machines and a small night lamp by the window. The patient lay motionless, draped in a hospital blanket, eyes closed, his face pale but strong, his jawline sculpted with a kind of stoic command that hinted at who he might have been before the silence claimed him. They said he had been brought in weeks ago after a car crash, alone and without identification. No family or name to claim him. His wallet had no clues, and the phone in his jacket was destroyed in the impact. Without any identifiers, the hospital had listed him as a John Doe and assigned a number. But Rita couldn't call him that. In her mind, he had always been more than a file or a stranger. She didn't know what made her linger here, what compelled her to stay each night after the rounds were done. But something about him, this unknown man suspended in timeless slumber, felt different. The world outside may have moved on, but inside room 214, time had folded quietly around a secret lullaby, and a woman who sang to a man who could not hear her. Or so she believed. She stepped inside now, closing the door gently behind her, her motions fluid from habit, from care. She checked his IV, adjusted the blanket, and noted his vitals, though they were unchanged, just as they had been the night before and the night before that. And then she pulled the small stool close to his bedside, sitting with her palms resting on her lap, eyes on his face. There was something undeniably magnetic about him. His brows were strong, a faint line between them even in unconsciousness, like he carried burdens even in dreams. His lips, slightly parted, were full and still, and though his skin was pale from weeks of immobility, it held the trace of a sun-kissed past. She leaned forward slightly, letting her eyes rest on him in silence before, slowly her lips parted and the softest melody escaped. A tune from her childhood, one her mother used to sing to her beneath the humid Karachi skies, when dreams were still simple and untouched by the burdens of adulthood. The notes floated through the quiet room like feathers, light and full of memory, winding through the IV poles and around the humming machines, weaving between reality and something softer. Her voice wasn't trained or grand. It was pure, unpolished, soaked in emotion rather than perfection. She never sang for anyone else, but for him it had become a ritual. A part of her heart left behind in a space where words were useless. Her songs were full of emotion. She didn't speak during her shift. The grief of watching families cry, the helplessness of losing patience despite every effort, the joy of a newborn's first cry, the heartbreak of an old woman dying with no one to hold her hand. Rita poured all of it into the notes, into the breath between verses, into the softness that coated every word. And as she sang, unaware of anything beyond the gentle rise and fall of the man's chest, she didn't notice the slight twitch in his fingertips, the minute flutter beneath his eyelids. Inside his silent world, Xavier Warner floated in a strange sea of memories, shadows and voices that drifted in and out of reach. There had been noise once, a crash, the sharp scream of metal, and then darkness. But then, amidst the void, something had changed. A sound had begun to reach him, tender and steady like a warm current. A voice. It had no name, but it had comfort. Night after night it returned, pulling him from the deep, wrapping around him like a soft embrace. He could not move, could not wake, but that voice, it made the silence bearable. Her voice was the only light in the dark. And though he had no name for her, he had started to wait for her. Her songs brought a warmth to his chest, a stirring in his soul. Somewhere deep inside, he remembered emotions, sorrow, loneliness, the cold walls of boardrooms, and the emptiness of power. But her voice chased the cold away. And tonight, her voice trembled a little more than usual, as if she had carried extra sorrow through the halls. Rita paused in her song, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, her eyes never leaving his face. "I don't even know your name," she whispered, her voice a breath against the steady beeping of the machines. "But you feel familiar, like someone I've known in another life." Her laughter was soft, half embarrassed. "Sounds silly, doesn't it?" She stood and moved toward the window, letting the curtain part slightly. The moonlight spilled into the room, casting silver lines across the floor. She looked back at him, silhouetted in the glow, still unmoving, still quiet. "You probably have a beautiful life waiting for you," she said. "Maybe you're someone important, a writer or a professor. Maybe your hands. They look like someone who's held the world before." She glanced at his fingers resting on the sheet, not rough but strong. She didn't know that those very hands had signed million-dollar deals, had held empires together through sheer will, had refused softness for years, until they clenched on that steering wheel the night everything shattered. She didn't know that the man she sang to was Xavier Warner, the elusive billionaire CEO whose disappearance had ignited headlines, whose company was still desperately searching for its leader, whose wealth meant nothing here in the solitude of coma-induced silence. All she saw was a man who had become part of her world in the most unexpected way. "I hope you're dreaming of something nice," she said quietly, moving back to her stool. "And if you ever come back, if you ever open your eyes, I hope you'll remember the songs." Her hand brushed his gently, not enough to disturb, just enough to feel warmth and remind herself he was still alive. And for a moment, she imagined what his eyes might look like when open. Would they be fierce or kind? Dark or bright? Would they recognize her? The idea made her chest ache with something she didn't dare name. Love was not for her, not in a place like this, not for someone like him. Still, she sang. She sang until the end of her shift, until the dawn began to stretch pink fingers across the sky outside the hospital. And when it was time to leave, she stood, adjusted his blanket one last time, and whispered, "Same time tomorrow." Her fingers lingered on the edge of his bed before she turned and left, the door clicking softly behind her. Silence returned, but something in the air had shifted. Beneath closed eyelids, a single tear escaped the corner of Xavier's eye, tracing a slow path down to the pillow. The silence that wrapped Xavier's world had never been silent at all. It breathed with pressure, surged with phantom sensations, and ached with distant echoes of the life he could no longer reach. Time had become a disjointed memory, indistinguishable from one moment to the next. as though he were floating in a dark, weightless space where only fragments of sensation made it through. Flashes of cold, pulses of muted pain, the heavy stillness that clung to his chest like chains. But lately something had changed. Subtly at first, then with unmistakable persistence. There was a sound, gentle and warm, threaded through the darkness like golden thread through rough fabric. It was her voice. He didn't know her name, had never seen her face, but her presence had become his constant. Every night she came, he couldn't see the soft light that followed her, or the way she tilted her head when she sang, but he felt the shift in the air when she entered. Her footsteps were a hush against the void. Then her voice would start, soft, steady, achingly beautiful, not in grandeur, but in sincerity. Each note stirred something inside him that he hadn't known still existed. At first it was just recognition, this sound again, the comforting presence in the storm of nothingness. Then it became hope, then longing, and now the mere anticipation of her arrival made the hours pass differently. He had begun to wait for her. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't open his eyes. But she was his lifeline, a lighthouse when everything else drowned in shadow. And now, even after she left, her presence lingered longer each night, like warmth trapped in fabric. Her words, though she didn't speak many, became sacred echoes in his mind, replaying endlessly. "I don't know your name," she had whispered, "but you feel familiar." That line stuck to his chest like a spark. Familiar, she had said, a stranger whose kindness poured from her voice, reaching places within him that even success, wealth, and power had never touched. Who was she? Why did her voice carry such unbearable comfort? He had built walls all his life, kept people out, poured his identity into titles, meetings, deals, and a schedule so precise it left no room for emotion. But here, now, he was bare, stripped of control, without armor. And it was this faceless woman who held him together without knowing it. He didn't know how she looked, but he imagined her from her voice, gentle but strong, with eyes that smiled even when her lips didn't, and hands that knew both exhaustion and tenderness. There was something about her that healed. Even now, lying unmoving, the thought of her made his chest feel fuller, warmer. His mind, once clouded by the weight of unconsciousness, had begun to clear. He remembered who he was. Savion Warner, CEO, billionaire, solitary force of industry, he had always known, but until now he hadn't cared. Those things felt hollow in this suspended space between sleep and death. But now something inside him wanted to live again, not for his empire, but to find the woman whose songs taught him how to feel. Her melody had found him in a place where nothing else could. There were nights her voice trembled. He felt her sadness, even though he didn't know its cause. Other nights, she laughed lightly between songs, and her joy was like sunrise after a storm. Her emotional fingerprints were in every note, and he had become fluent in her unspoken language. Tonight, as the hum of machines filled the room again, he waited. He knew she would come. He felt her even before she spoke, her presence like the first raindrop before a summer downpour. Then came the song, not the same as before, but her, always her. It flowed through him like fire, melting, rush of something unfamiliar but deeply human. Relief. She didn't react, not with recognition, not with suspicion. Just a soft nod as if the name was enough, as if the man in the bed was all that mattered, not the empire he had built or the fortune that trailed behind his last name like a shadow. "Xavion," she repeated gently, trying it on like a note in one of her lullabies, and it settled in the air between them like a secret shared. He exhaled, slow and shaky, the tension in his chest unraveling just a little. "I'm glad you came," he said, and meant every syllable. Rita smiled again, the kind of smile that starts in the eyes and blooms gently outward. "I didn't think you'd remember me." "How could I forget?" he murmured, and her gaze flickered, surprised, uncertain, deeply moved. He watched her hands as she adjusted his IV line, the careful grace in her fingers, the way she touched the world like it was breakable. There was something sacred in her presence, something reverent. She didn't just move through the room, she softened it, Rita pulled the blanket gently over his legs and sat beside the bed on the padded chair, her posture relaxed but her eyes alert. "You're going to need a lot of rest," she said softly. "The worst is behind you, but the healing, it takes time." "I don't mind time," he said. "Not if you're in it." Her breath caught, just a fraction, but it was there. She looked at him, really looked, past the bruises of his recent battle, past the physical fragility. There was clarity in her eyes now, a recognition not of who he was, but what he was becoming. Not a patient, not a billionaire, but a man walking back into his life one step at a time, carrying the sound of her voice like a compass. "I'll be around," she said after a moment, her voice almost a whisper. "Not every shift, but I'll make time." He nodded slowly. "Good, because I'm not sure I know how to do this without you." "You'll learn," she said, a flicker of playfulness returning to her tone. "But I'll be close, just in case." The late sunlight shifted through the window, a golden hush spilling across his blanket. The courtyard trees swayed in rhythm with a wind they couldn't hear, and somewhere, a bird trilled a single clean note, high, delicate, full of promise. Xavier turned his head slightly on the pillow, every muscle aching, but his eyes steady on hers. "Will you sing to me again?" he asked, the question almost boyish in its vulnerability. Rita hesitated only a breath, then nodded, her eyes shimmering. She leaned in closer, her voice soft and full of something holy. She sang, not for the machines, not for the hospital, for him. And Xavier, once a man drowning in silence, closed his eyes and drifted. Not away, but toward something, toward life, toward her, toward the melody that had become his lifeline. And in that softly lit room, where shadows danced gently against the walls, a love story began, not loud, not sudden, but like her voice, soft, healing, unforgettable. As Rita hummed a soft lullaby through the phone, unaware she'd started doing it aloud. It was the same lullaby her mother used to sing to her, the one that always made her feel safe, even when the world felt uncertain. Xavier listened, eyes closed, letting the melody carry him to a place he didn't know he'd been missing. No boardroom could match this stillness. No luxury penthouse ever felt like this. "Keep singing," he whispered, barely audible, but Rita heard. Her voice faltered for a second, then returned, quieter this time, softer, like a secret only the stars and Xavier were allowed to hear. When she finished, there was a pause. Not awkward, sacred. "Your mother must have been a beautiful soul," Xavier murmured. "She was," Rita said, and her voice wavered just slightly. "She used to tell me that songs are how the soul speaks when words aren't enough." "Then your soul," Xavier said gently, "has the most beautiful voice I've ever heard." The silence after that wasn't silence at all. It was full of emotion, unspoken truths swelling between them like a tide that would eventually reach the shore. Rita didn't answer, not with words. She didn't need to. Xavier knew. And somewhere between the spaces of the call, between their breaths and quiet laughter, a love story had begun. Not the kind plastered on magazine covers, not the kind traded in headlines or whispered in society's elite corridors, but the kind built slowly, tenderly, the kind that starts with shared stories, late-night humming, and two souls brave enough to be seen, not for who the world says they are, but for who they truly are beneath it all. And Xavier, the man the world thought had everything, was beginning to realize. He was just now finding what he'd been missing all along. Her. Like I was something precious instead of something surviving. Rita's breath caught, not from the revelation of his wealth or the title that echoed across newspapers, but from the way his words stripped everything else away. She had known Xavier as a voice first, then as a presence, then as a comfort, and finally as the man who had made her believe in safety again. Now standing in a mansion glittering with quiet opulence, the truth wasn't in the marble or the crystal, but in the tremble of his hands as he held her face. "I needed you to love me for who I am," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Before I told you who the world thinks I am. I needed to know this was real, that we were real." Tears welled in her eyes, Not from pain, not even from the overwhelming surprise, but from the weight of his trust. Of all the people he could have shared this secret with, he chose her, and he hadn't used it to impress or manipulate. He had hidden it, protected it, so that love could grow free of expectation. She pressed her forehead to his, her voice shaking with emotion. I didn't fall for a billionaire, Xavier. I fell for the man who listened when I cried at 2 a.m., who laughed with me when I burned toast, who made me feel like my voice mattered. Her hands rested on his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heart. I don't care about any of this, she whispered, sweeping a glance around the room. I care about you. Just you. A sob caught in his throat, quiet and stunned. And then he was pulling her into his arms again, holding her with a reverence that came from knowing she had seen all of him now and hadn't run. She had stayed, chosen him. Lightning cracked again outside, this time met with the gentler hush of rain easing into a steady whisper against the tall windows. The fire crackled beside them as they held each other in the center of a room built from wealth, but now sanctified by truth. After a long moment, Rita pulled back slightly, a mischievous smile tugging at her lips. Does this mean I'm technically engaged to the world's youngest billionaire? Savian laughed, a real deep sound that echoed through the halls like music. It means you're engaged to the world's happiest man. She leaned up, kissed his cheek, then his lips. Good, because I don't care how many zeros are in your bank account. I just want the man who still listens, like every word I say is a song. And in that moment, surrounded by everything he thought might scare her away, Rita gave him the only thing he had truly wanted, a love not for what he had, but for who he was. And with that, the beginning of forever truly began. So not with urgency, but with awe, entering her like a man discovering a sacred realm for the first time. Every motion, every breath was steeped in meaning, a merging not just of bodies, but of pasts and futures, of silent scars and whispered hopes. Rita gasped softly, her fingers finding his as they laced together above her heart, anchoring each other in the storm of sensation and emotion. Xavier's forehead pressed to hers, their breaths mingling, and for a moment, nothing else existed. No kingdom, no history, no audience. Just the rhythm of two hearts learning to beat as one. His movements were slow, reverent, like a vow repeated over and over in the sacred language of touch. And with every thrust, every kiss, he told her, "You are mine. I am yours. We are forever." Tears slipped silently from the corners of Rita's eyes, not of pain or fear, but of release, of gratitude, of wonder that after all the trials, she could feel so wholly seen, so utterly adored. Xavier noticed, pausing just enough to kiss them away, whispering, "You're safe. You're everything. I love you." Their bodies moved together in a perfect, unspoken rhythm, building a crescendo that felt like stars colliding. When release came, it did not shatter. It sanctified. They held each other through it, trembling, hearts beating in harmony, their souls bound in a way no ceremony could match. Afterward, Xavier pulled her against his chest, wrapping her in the warmth of his arms and a silence thick with wonder. The candles still flickered, casting their golden light upon two lovers no longer just king and queen, but soulmates eternally entwined. Rita looked up at him, her voice no more than a breath. "What now?" He smiled, brushing her hair back with infinite tenderness. "Now we dream together. Now we build forever." And in that royal chamber, where passion met devotion, where silk met skin and vows met soul, a love story didn't just find its climax, it found its eternity. Way she could calm their son with nothing but a whispered lullaby. The way she made their house a home with her laughter. The way her strength cloaked their life in peace. Each day she astounded him anew, not with grand gestures, but with the quiet majesty of her presence. On quiet evenings when their son slept peacefully, wrapped in the softness of cashmere and dreams, Xavier and Rita would sit together on the terrace. The world below twinkled with city lights, but their eyes were only for each other. Rita would curl into his side, her fingers tracing idle circles on his palm, and Xavier would listen to her heartbeat, that eternal rhythm that had become the center of his world. They rarely needed words. Their love was fluent in silence, in glances, in breathless smiles shared beneath moonlight. It was in the way she looked at him when he wasn't watching, in the way he knew to pour her favorite tea before she even asked, in the way their lives had woven into one seamless tapestry, threaded with history, tenderness, and the promise of always. Sometimes Xavian would hold their son close and whisper, "You'll know one day what it's like to love someone so deeply the world feels quiet when she's near." He hoped their child would grow up surrounded not just by luxury, but by the kind of love that shaped hearts and softened souls. As the seasons turned, so did the chapters of their story. But through every change, their love remained a constant, stronger, deeper, richer. It wasn't the opulence of their world that defined them, but the way they carried each other through it. Rita, the woman who once sang to him through hospital monitors, who held his soul steady when it trembled, was now the melody of their everyday. And Xavian, the man who once walked alone through boardrooms and battlegrounds, was now a husband, a father, a man made whole by love. And so, as the stars watched over them and the world hushed into night, their story continued. Not in endings, but in the forever they built with every heartbeat, every kiss, every whispered vow in the dark. Because in the end, theirs was not just a love story, it was a life story, and it was only just beginning.